We are counting down the top 10 matches in SummerSlam history as ranked by me. We're down to number 4, and you could easily have this as number 1 on your list. It's one of my all-time favorite SummerSlam matches from Madison Square Garden in 1991. Mr. Perfect defending the Intercontinental title against the Hitman Bret Hart. I have always had an affinity for that 1991 SummerSlam. This match, we had the Big Boss Man, Mountie, Jailbird match, all the silly segments that followed with Mountie being hauled off to jail for the night. Ted DiBiase losing his $1 million title for the first time to Virgil. LOD getting their first taste of tag team gold in WWE. Beating the Nasty Boys. The whole match made in heaven, match made in hell deal there at the end. We have 3 title changes on that show at a time when they only had 3 titles officially in that company. The $1 million belt deal was sort of an anomaly. It didn't get defended very often. So I don't know if you would even count that officially as a title. I guess on that night you would. So, 3 title changes, I guess, out of 4 belts. That was a pretty newsworthy night for a WWE pay-per-view back then. Bret Hart had been a tag team wrestler in the company up to this point. He wrestled singles matches from time to time. He had matches with Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat and Ted DiBiase. So it's not like he never wrestled any singles matches. But he was a tag team guy. He was one half of the Hart Foundation with Jim Neidhart. 2 tag team titles and 2 great matches at SummerSlam in the 2 years prior to this. In '89, they had a great match against the Brainbusters, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. And the year before, in 1990, they had a great 2 out of 3 fall. There's that stipulation again. 2 out of 3 falls match against Demolition. But the idea in putting him and the Anvil together as a team, when he first came to WWE, and this would have been 1984, 1985, sometime around then, the idea was, we're going to get Bret ready for a singles run. They were grooming him to be a singles star. Not so much Neidhart. Not the Anvil. It was Bret that they had future hopes and plans for. And so after they dropped the tag belts to the Nasty Boys at WrestleMania 7, Bret was told they're going to launch him as a single. And then in May, Vince McMahon did what Vince McMahon does, and he changed his mind. And he told Bret that they were going to put him and the Anvil back together. A few weeks after that, Vince changed his mind again. Vince McMahon changing his mind. What a surprise. And he told Bret that not only would he not be putting him back with the Anvil, they're going to keep him as a single, and they're going to put the Intercontinental title on him that summer at SummerSlam. He was going to take the championship from Curt Hennig. Now, the problem was that Hennig's back gave out on him that summer. He was in a lot of pain. All that bumping around, I'm sure, did not do his back any good. He ended up missing most of the summer, trying to heal up and be ready for SummerSlam. Now, I could have sworn, when I was thinking about this, in putting my notes together, I was thinking I could have sworn that I remember seeing a squash match that aired after SummerSlam with Mr. Perfect. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, I knew I wasn't crazy. He did appear once on TV after dropping the title, but it was actually taped well before SummerSlam. A whole month before SummerSlam. Just didn't air on TV until September. It was a Wrestling Challenge taping on July 30th. They shot an angle that did not air on TV where Bret Hart stole the Intercontinental belt from Mr. Perfect. This was before a squash match that Perfect was scheduled to go out there and have. I don't know if there was a big brawl that occurred and they brawled to the back and then Perfect came back out, but Bret stole the belt. And if you find the match on YouTube, it's Mr. Perfect against Mark Thomas. All you see is as they're fading back in, coming back from commercial break, you can see there's like this distant shot, overhead shot of the arena, and you see Mr. Perfect just sprinting down to the ring, sliding in. He's got this really foul-looking look on his face. He's in a foul mood. He does not have the Intercontinental title with him because it was stolen. And nor does Mike McGurk announce him as the champion. She announces him as, his weight and He's Mr. Perfect. She does not say the reigning Intercontinental Champion because, of course, they knew this wouldn't be airing until after SummerSlam, and they knew he was not going to be the champion anymore. And so he proceeded to beat the holy hell out of this Mark Thomas guy for the next 15 seconds, violently takes him down to the mat, and basically rolls him over for a pin like you would see in an amateur wrestling match. It was maybe the most unique Mr. Perfect match, the most unique Mr. Perfect win that I've ever seen. And watching it on TV at that time, you would think he was angry because he just lost the championship at SummerSlam. In actuality, he was upset and playing it that way in front of the crowd because I think in front of them, Bret had just stolen the belt, literally, physically stolen the title from him. So 2 weeks before SummerSlam, it's August 10th. Bret did a photo shoot with the belt for the November issue of WWF Magazine. So the title change was a done deal at that point. Bret had a sense that this could be Curt's last match, so he really wanted it to be a good one. And sometime after WrestleMania 7, Bobby Heenan had decided that he didn't want to manage anymore. Maybe his neck was acting up, so they split him away from Perfect, and they put John Tolos in as the new manager for Mr. Perfect, and they called him Coach. Like a literal coach, with a hat and a whistle, the whole deal. You would never have known that at one time Tolos was a big name himself. He had a famous feud with Fred Blassie that drew huge, although it wasn't in WWE. But here he only lasted a few months. Once Perfect dropped the championship and he took a sabbatical, Coach was pretty much finished. He had been managing the Beverly Brothers as well. They replaced him with the Genius. So if there's one sort of red mark on this, and look, maybe it was just a case of the company giving Tolos, kind of throwing him a bone. Yeah, it was a goofy gimmick, but they gave him a job. Maybe he needed the money. I don't know. But from a character perspective, when you watch this, it was completely unnecessary for him to be there. Other than, I guess, if they wanted that spot towards the end where Bret was going for the sharpshooter and Coach jumped up on the apron. I guess maybe they just wanted a heel manager to be there and Bobby couldn't do it or wouldn't do it. So maybe not completely unnecessary, but it just felt he didn't need to be there. But we get to SummerSlam. Bret's family is in the crowd. His parents, Stu and Helen. His brother Bruce is there. In his book, he said that his wife Julie was supposed to be there, or maybe she was in New York, but he later learned that she wasn't at the show watching him win the championship. She went shopping. She went shopping instead. Gorilla Monsoon, Bobby Heenan, and Roddy Piper were on the call for this match. All three now are gone, as is Mr. Perfect. Bret is the lone survivor, much like in that image of the Hart Foundation faction. Very sad to see. He is the lone survivor. Heenan was gold as usual when they showed Stu and Helen on camera, and Monsoon said they had a look of concern on their faces at one point during the match. Bobby said, well, you know why they're concerned? Because they snuck in. They're afraid of getting caught. I love it. One other thing I noticed going back and watching it was how they paid homage to this match in their King of the Ring rematch 2 years later. And I like their King of the Ring match better than this one. I actually think their King of the Ring 93 match is better than their SummerSlam match. The match at the King of the Ring is so is this one, but that one is one of my all-time favorites. And one of the spots in this match here in 91 had Bret out on the apron, and Perfect comes over, and he sends him flying off the apron, hurling towards the barricade. Although in their King of the Ring match, Bret lands knee first on top of a cooler that was sitting at ring. One of those plastic, like cooling bins that you would put ice and like Coke cans in and stuff. He landed on that thing knees first, which that could not have felt good. But that spot in that match in 93 was a takeoff of the spot they did here in this match, where Perfect sent Bret flying off the apron and into the barricade. Only here, there was a foreign photographer at ringside who got trapped in the line of fire underneath Bret. So it's funny, like Bret lands and he's in pain and he's just sort of laying there. And this guy is like, he's like a turtle popping his head out of his shell. Like, I don't know how to get out of this situation here. So I thought that was kind of amusing. But Perfect was wincing his way through this like he was Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 14. And yet, the match, I don't think, really suffered much because of it. There might have been certain things that they could have done that they couldn't do because of his back. And you could think, oh, well, imagine if Perfect was physically 100%. And yeah, he had put a little bit of weight on, you could tell, because he wasn't able to train the way that he had trained. You look at Perfect the year before this, he was slimmer and just in better shape. But even still, I really don't think the match suffered much because of it. So we fast forward towards the end. Perfect Plex. That's his finishing move. Bret kicks out. And they make a big deal on commentary about how nobody's ever kicked out. I think Heenan was saying, nobody's ever kicked out of the Perfect Plex before. Not true. Hulk Hogan kicked out of it. And the Ultimate Warrior kicked out of it. Both of them in the same year, the year before this. Hogan on Saturday night's main event match against Perfect. And the Warrior at Survivor Series. But I guess it makes for a better story. And it helps Bret get over. So Bret makes a comeback. He hits a suplex. Gorilla Monsoon debuts the phrase Suplex City. We got a Suplex City reference here, long before Brock Lesnar ever came up with it. And if you remember, when Undertaker dropped Jake the Snake on his head at WrestleMania 8, we got a Tombstone City reference from Monsoon. He liked adding the word city onto things. It's too bad he never called an ECW match. We might have been able to get a New Jack City reference. So we get a lot of Bret's signature moves. Side Russian leg sweep, which Monsoon always called a neck breaker. Back breaker across the knee. Elbow off the middle rope for a near fall. These would become Bret's greatest hits. His 5 moves of doom. Sharpshooter attempt. Coach jumps up on the apron. Bret punches him in the face. And Bobby Heenan cannot believe this. Bobby Heenan is appalled by this. He punched the coach, a man wearing glasses. This man wears glasses. He punched him in the face. What kind of person would do such a thing? Perfect sees Bret. Bret's kind of in the ropes, looking down at Coach, at what he just did. Perfect sees an opening. He kicks the middle rope and crotches Bret. I always love that. It's such a small little thing, but instead of him just giving him a low blow or something, he just kicks the rope. And the rope, goes up into Bret's nuts and he falls down. And now Perfect is dropping a leg across Bret's groin. Bret grabs a hold of his leg, though, the second time he tries this. Perfect tries to drop a second leg drop across Bret's groin. Bret grabs the leg. And he's laying flat on his back. From a prone position, a horizontal position on his back, he maneuvers Perfect's legs into a sharpshooter. And before Bret can even sit up straight, Earl Hebner calls for the bell. So yes, he called for the bell way too early. You can call it a botch. I don't know what words you want to use for it. He definitely called for the bell and ended the match a little too soon. But Bret wrenched back on maybe he was trying to protect Perfect's back. Bret didn't seem to be protecting his back there. He wrenched back on that sharpshooter and held onto it for a few seconds. The place went nuts. And it was just this great, iconic moment of him winning his first singles championship and this Madison Square Garden crowd losing their mind. And it was fantastic. And so Perfect, he kicks Bret in the ribs when he gets up. And he goes to walk out. And Bret grabs Perfect by the singlet. And he is just tearing this thing to shreds. And he tears the singlet right off of Perfect's body. That was a Mr. Perfect idea, by the way. That's what Bret said. He did everything he could to make Bret look like $1 million and really put this guy over. And the funniest part came a little bit later when they sent the camera to Lord Alfred Hayes, who was stationed in the crowd where Stu and Helen Hart were, and they were going to interview, or he was going to interview them about Bret's win. And so he's about to interview Stu. Bret comes over, and so Bret's hugging his mom. And while that's going on, Alfred just goes to Stu, "Tell me exactly what you think about your son winning the championship here tonight." And he lets Stu get exactly 2 words out before pulling the microphone away from him. Literally, Stu just says, "Oh, it's wonderful." And Hayes just goes, "Well, there you go." He's a little bit speechless right now and yanks the microphone away. And if you look at Stu in the background, he's still talking. I have no idea what that was all about, but I laughed wildly at this when I watched it all over again. Perfect would become Ric Flair's executive consultant. He would do commentary for the next year, but he would not wrestle again for over a year. And he only came back when Vince McMahon fired the Ultimate Warrior, and they needed somebody to team up with Randy Savage in '92 at the Survivor Series against Ric Flair and Razor Ramon. Now, I'm sure Perfect would have come back anyway at some point, probably in 93, but he came back a lot quicker because they needed somebody they could, in this case, turn. They had to do a whole babyface turn. That's when they did that whole angle on Primetime Wrestling. On this one episode of Primetime Wrestling, it was a studio show. And they did this great angle. It really lasted, I think, throughout the entire show. Bobby Heenan was just saying the wrong things to Mr. Perfect. And Perfect was taking great offense to this. And in the end, he dumped a pitcher of water on Bobby's head. Because Savage, here's how the angle played. It was so great. They pitched it to Randy Savage, quote-unquote, via satellite. Okay, he's probably in the closet or something. So they say to Savage, you know, what are you going to do? Survivor Series, you lost your partner. And he goes, I want Mr. Perfect to be my partner. And of course, they have a great laugh. Perfect laughs at this. Bobby Heenan laughs at this. Vince McMahon and the other panelists, they can't believe it. And that's how it plays out for the rest of the episode. It's like, Mr. Perfect is Randy Savage's tag team partner. Give me a break. But as Flair or Heenan is making these comments about how basically Perfect knows his place and he would never do such a thing and Flair is better and all that kind of stuff, that's what starts to irk Mr. Perfect. And in the end, he agrees to be Randy Savage's partner. It's a classic angle. It was very well done. And they were in a jam. They had to come up with an alternate idea. And I thought they did the best job with it that they possibly could. But in the aftermath of SummerSlam, instead of these planned rematches at all the live events with Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect, you look at old house show records and you see, you know, where Mr. Perfect was supposed to be, he had a substitute. And that substitute, in all of these matches for months, was the Warlord. So imagine if you're Bret Hart. Poor Bret. Could have been working with Hennig. Hennig's probably his all-time favorite opponent. He could have been working 2-3 months on the road with Mr. Perfect after SummerSlam, and instead, he had to work the Warlord every night. Sure, the Warlord is a nice guy, but he ain't no Mr. Perfect. As for Bret, Roddy Piper came to him weeks before he dropped the championship in January. He wanted to let him know, here's the plan. We're going to have you drop the belt to the Mountie at a live event 2 days before the Royal Rumble. The story being that Bret came into the match sick. He had 104-degree fever. He gave it his all. He fought valiantly, but he got pinned and beaten by the Mountie. The Mountie would be the definition of a transitional champion. He would drop the belt 2 days later at the Rumble to Roddy Piper. And Piper would then drop the belt back to Bret and do the honors for him at WrestleMania 8. Which is exactly what happened, and it was the biggest win up to that point of Bret's career. Rarely did you see Roddy Piper job cleanly to anybody. He wouldn't even do it for Hogan when they were feuding back in the mid-'80s. I don't think he lost clean to him one time. You will not find footage from 84, 85 of Roddy Piper eating a leg drop and getting pinned. Doesn't exist. So there have been stories over the years that they took the title off Bret in a panic because they found out he was negotiating with WCW. In reality, the plan to get the belt off of him was made before those talks even started. But he did end up having conversations with WCW about coming in around that same time. There is some smoke to that fire. And supposedly, he agreed to a deal with WCW to make the jump. He was going to make the jump, but Bret did not realize something. He did not realize when he agreed to do this that his WWF contract had rolled over, so he could not go anywhere. He was under contract for, I guess it would have been at least another year. And how different things might have been had Bret Hart jumped to WCW in 1992. Who would they have put the title on and built around later that year if not for Bret? It was too early for Shawn Michaels. British Bulldog got fired. Ultimate Warrior got fired. There were rumors that there was a list of people they were going to put the belt on, and Bret got the nod, but Tito Santana was on the list, and Tatanka may have been on the list. And I believe that. I believe that Tito may well have been considered, as unbelievable as it is to think about Tito Santana being WWF champion. I don't think they ever would have actually gone through with it, but maybe there was a list. That's what Bret was told, I think, by Patterson. There was a physical list of 5 or 6 names, and Bret was on there, and Tito, and a few other names. I'm thinking if not Bret, they may have just gone with The Undertaker. I mean, Undertaker, Look, he couldn't, work a match the way that a Bret Hart could. I mean, if they wanted like a guy who could actually work a long match, Undertaker probably wouldn't have been the guy to go with. But he was super over. Maybe it would have been him. It's an interesting what if. What if Bret was not around and had left? Who would they have gone with?